Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
So all week here on Off the Ball, we've been running a series around the future of Irish sport. It is a vast topic. We've already touched on PE in schools, player development. We've talked about participation and dropout rates, around resources for underprivileged areas. And we're going to keep this discussion going over the coming days and weeks. We'd love your feedback as well. You can text us 53106. You can get in touch on social media at Off the Ball. If you're there on the ground, if you have any viewpoint, please do get in touch and we'll put it to the experts over the coming days and weeks. To continue the discussion right now, I'm delighted to be joined by the senior coach with Leinster Rugby, Stuart Lancaster. Good evening, Stuart.
Evening, Nathan. How are you?
Very well. This is an area that you're very familiar with. You've been, well, working with the best of the best for the last decade or so, but previous to that, 20 years ago, you were working as a PE teacher. You've worked through academy level as well, so you've seen all sides of sport at this stage.
Yeah, and I would also probably take it back to my son and daughter started playing, obviously, sport at a young age. I coached my son, well, my daughter played rugby as well, actually, from under sixes upwards. So I guess you can go from under sixes all the way through to, I guess, top-end European and international rugby. So yeah, I've covered it from every area. But the 10 years as a PE teacher were really formative in shaping my mindset on sport in general. And also, I guess, probably the 5 years as an academy manager where there was some really good coach education around that time on how to develop, identify and develop talent and, you know, create pathways for sustained excellence.
What was your aim as a PE teacher? What did you feel your role was?
My role, I felt, was to motivate and inspire young people to enjoy sport whilst they're at school, try and give them different avenues that they could explore when they leave school. And I guess most importantly, try and give them an understanding of what a good and healthy lifestyle would look and feel like, and to give them a passion or an experience that they could grab hold of and take into further life. You know, whether that's anything from swimming to gymnastics to badminton to hockey to soccer to rugby to health and fitness, you know, you name it. I coached it really, or taught it, as I'm sure a lot of schools do also.
There does seem to be, from what we've been hearing this week, a real disparity around the country depending on the type of PE teacher you have as to the type of experience you're getting, whether you're getting that wholesome view, that well-rounded view that will last you, whether you want to be a serious sports person or not, or whether you just want to play at the weekend socially, or just understand how important it is for your fitness, or actually maybe teachers who are focusing on another area who are thrown into PE. It is vital, it seems, for young children in particular to have the right person in that role as a PE teacher.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth exploring a little bit the evolution of schools in England, I guess, or in the UK, just to give you some context of how it evolved. I'm less knowledgeable about the system in Ireland, but so when I first started, so this was, so I did a sports science degree, then a teacher training degree in 1991, 92. And then my first teaching job was a school called Heysham High School in Morecambe, right on the west coast of England. And we had Saturday, it was just a 11 to 18 comprehensive, but we had Saturday sport. So every Saturday we would have soccer teams, rugby teams, hockey teams, netball teams, all playing, even though it was it wasn't a fee-paying school. And that tradition during the 90s in England really started to die out. So I went to my next school, Kelthorpe High School, and we had fixtures. You know, we had athletics matches and cross-country fixtures and basketball fixtures and, you know, you name it. But it was all traditionally Monday to Friday, and Saturdays and Sundays were very much family time, or you know, in my case, I played rugby at the weekend. And gradually during the 90s, there was teacher strikes, and teachers became a bit disaffected with, you know, the support or the environments that they were working in. And as a consequence, like I said, there was these strikes at place. And a lot of the Saturday sport that used to happen in the state school system in England sort of fell by the wayside. And then the government came up with what was called a school sports coordinator scheme. And basically, people were appointed to develop expertise and talent within the primary schools, and then they would network secondary schools together and basically be a support for the PE teachers or the people running the department. So there's a real consistency and an excellence and a network set up, this almost pyramid that was set up with a partnership development manager who would look after the school sports coordinators. And it really was beginning to sort of take shape. And this is now the early 2000s, I think. And then for whatever reason, the government at the time just scrapped the whole scheme. And from that point onwards, we're almost back to worse than where we were when we were in the early 90s, where there was less and less support for PE teachers. And you are right, it then became down to the enthusiasm and the commitment of that particular PE teacher or that particular PE department.
And it's the same as any other subject, that the personality of the teacher is going to be crucial to your enjoyment of it. It was interesting listening to Niall Moyna on Tuesday night, where he was talking about still that culture, particularly around girls, of getting the note from the parents saying, actually, they don't want to take part in PE today, can you let them skip it? And that the teacher feels under pressure to let them do that. From your point of view, I guess it's always easy as a PE teacher to deal with the whatever percentage, 50%, who love sport and who want, and it's the highlight of their week, getting out there. How did you treat the other 50% who maybe weren't that keen, who sport wasn't really something for them, to make sure that actually they got the value out of PE that would still stick with them, even if it wasn't on a competitive level?
Yeah, I think the key is to have a broad and balanced curriculum, so it appeal to everyone. But equally, if you can motivate and create the right sort of session plan and lesson plan, and you differentiate for people of different abilities, everyone could enjoy a badminton lesson or a gymnastics lessons or whatever. If you pitch it in the right way, you make it a games-based approach, you make it fun, you make it active. You pitch people with of similar ability together. You don't look to make it elitist. You actually do the opposite. You make it inclusive. That was very much as I saw it, because you're right. Not everyone wanted to do every sport all the time. But certainly my experience for the school I was at, which was 11 to 16 state school in West Yorkshire, the uptake and the motivation to take part in PE lessons was always high. And we had a very good department, we're all very like-minded. And I guess one thing that changed as well, that we made it, as the longer it went into my teaching career, the more we tried to make it less games-focused all the time, more a balance between the traditional games that we'd play in England, but also the more fitness training or personal training, or the things that sometimes girls and boys would prefer to do, whether it's circuit training or introduction to aerobics or to whatever it was at the time, HIIT training that you'd call it now. So that was very much our job. That's your job as a teacher. It's to motivate, inspire, and try and give people motivation to want to exercise both within school, but more importantly outside of school as well.
It was interesting there, you mentioned your children when they were younger, and you were helping out, I presume, when they were playing sports. Jason Sherlock was on Monday talking about Jim Gavin and how a lot of coaches of underage teams would look at Jim Gavin as an inspiration, or the mini Mourinhos who were out there. And he was making the point how Jim Gavin, as Dublin senior football manager, is obviously going to be a very different person when he goes back to Ballyboden coaching his kids' teams, because what he's doing with the Dublin senior footballers isn't relevant for an under-12 team. Yet strangely, a lot of other coaches are just looking at Jim Gavin, the coach of the Dublin senior football team, and they just want to be that, not realising it's not relevant for that particular age group. I'm sure you get lots of people coming to you for advice around coaching. How much do you feel of what you're doing, say, with Leinster, with the elite players right now, is relevant for coaches watching on who are involved in underage teams?
It's not hugely. Obviously, it depends on, there's a sliding scale here. What you do with an under-6 team is different to what you do with an under-10 or under-12 team, is different to what you do with an under-17, under-18, under-19 team. So it depends very much on the age range that you're coaching. But, my belief is, certainly my philosophy at the time of coaching, Daniel and Sophie's team was to make it as inclusive again as possible, and make it fun. It was a long, long way, when you're coaching an under-10 team, it's a long, long way from what professional rugby looks like. You want to make it safe, enjoyable, fun. And what they really enjoyed was obviously getting the kit and feeling part of a team. But the result, with all due respect to the level at the time, was irrelevant, really. But you would see, you're right, you would see teams, you would see coaches who would constantly be berating their own players on the sideline, or the referee, or the win at all costs mentality, which was just a nonsense, really, I thought. I would spend a lot of time with the parents as well, trying to help the parents help the children as well. So I would do a lot of sort of parents' evenings and try and explain some of the techniques that we're doing, or some of the things that they can practice in their own time, because the kids would come, say, on a Sunday for 2 hours of mini rugby. And there's a great book called Finding the Champion in Your Child, and how to get the best out of your child and how to ask the right questions. So you're not that super keen parent on the sideline who's living their lives through their children, So, and we were big on fun, and the bit kids like as well is the post-match bit in the bar or in the clubhouse, you know what I mean, where you're having a bit of crack with your mates, and you're eating your pie and peas, as it was in West Park, and so it was the package, really. We went on tour again. Did it matter if we win or lose? No, not really. But you ultimately wanted to develop them as people as well, and see them grow, and that's the beauty of sport. It teaches you a lot of lessons about life in general, and that's why, obviously, I'd be biased. That's why I think young people playing sport is crucial to life skills.
It's a hard balance, I'd imagine, when you're having those conversations, though, with parents, when you have, say, particularly talented players who are starting to get selected on representative teams, who maybe can start thinking about a future in the game, whereas their child may not be at that level, but there are other skills and life skills that they can learn by being part of that team. Yet the focus so often is just on the elite guy. Did you find that difficult as a coach to get that balance?
No, I didn't personally, but I can see the point you're making. But I think that, again, it depends on the sport. But if you take a sport like rugby, that sort of differentiation between the ones who are going to get selected for representative teams or into sort of sub-academy or academy pathways, it only really happens around about 14, 15, 16 years old anyway. And even then, there is still, I could name you hundreds of players who were elite or perceived elite at 16 who never really went on to make it. And also, equally, I could name hundreds of people who weren't that super talented at 16 who went on to make it to play professional rugby. So, it's rugby very much, and a lot of sports are late specialisation sports. And the more sports that you can play as a young person, the better. So, I would encourage my kids to play basketball, tennis, badminton. They went to gymnastics classes, swimming, and I wasn't too fussed if they were elite or not elite. I just wanted them to have a really rounded perspective of sport and a really rounded experience. And also, if you spot that sort of sense of the parent becoming involved, who thinks their child should be on a pathway to greatness, again, you can do a lot of work by just educating the parents about how to help support their child and not make it, so black and white in terms of success or failure, because it's never black and white.
In terms of specialisation then, would you have seen any sort of trend through your time, even working with Leinster now, where there's an awful lot of players coming through and there's this brilliant academy system, and even going back to when you were at the academy system in Leeds, would you have seen any trend of players who specialised from an early age to a late age, or players who were playing soccer and GEA to 15, 16, but it didn't hamper their rugby career? Or is it the other way, where actually a lot of players coming through are focusing fully from 14, 15 on the one sport?
No, I would say typically in England, or certainly in the academy system I was involved in, the specialisation into rugby only really truly happened around about when they left school at 18 and 19. Most of the time they were doing a variety of different things. And actually, I'd argue strongly that the best players are the ones who actually had the broadest experiences in different sports. The invasion game of rugby, it's not exactly the same as other invasion sports, but the concept of space and playing to space and identifying space in basketball or in soccer or in hockey or in hurling or Gaelic football. They're all the same sort of concepts, really. So the more you can play and the more you can get that feel, the better, really. And some of the best footballers and rugby players, if you like, who've got the best decision makers, are the ones who played the most sports and got that rounded skill set. And then, yes, you do narrow it down around about 19 or 20. But a lot of people, I mean, England, there used to be an England under 16 team, and eventually within the pathway, we did away with it because it was just creating false hopes and false impressions on players, because the number of players that came through England 16s to England 20s was down to about 10%. You can only really start to truly identify talent in rugby, for me, around about 20, 21 years old. And I say, the same thing. There's a lot of players I've coached at 18 who are perceived to be not good enough, who, just with another couple of years, a bit more experience. And clearly, in sport like rugby as well, the physical element does play a part, there's no doubt. So physical genetics, if you like, but also the environment that people are brought up in plays a part. And ultimately, the opportunity that players get plays a part.
Yeah, that conversation when they're 16 and they're the superstar of the team, and it's still a long way away, but they're looking at a Jordan Larmour or a James Ryan. It's hard to point out that they're almost the freaks of the system, that they're making that breakthrough as 19, 20-year-olds. So for the vast majority of players, actually, it is 22, 23 when you're finally physically ready to be a professional rugby player. Yeah,
but also there's a study done on the serial Olympians, the ones who've won the gold medals, like not just one Olympic cycle, but 2, 3, 4 Olympic gold medals. And the ones, and it was Anya McNamee who did this. She works out of DCU, I think, and she talks about the Rocky Road, the people who've had no obstacles in the way on their pathway through to the top end, usually the ones who don't have the resilience or the character or the mindset to come through when adversity strikes. Whereas the people who've had to fight their way through the rocks, and it could be, I don't know, non-selection, it could be an injury, it could be whatever, who've had to prove people wrong, they're the ones who typically come through. And the study showed that those serial gold medalists, they're the ones who always had worked their way through the rocky road. So actually, if parents come to me and say, listen, he's really disappointed not to have been picked, I'm going, this is a good thing for him. This'll help him in the long run, because he'll have to, start reflecting on his own level of performance, what he can do better, and so on and so forth. And my own son would be an example. He hasn't got picked for any age grade teams. He's a reasonably talented player. He's finally just broken into the England 20 squad, but not having played in any age grade teams before then. And I kept saying to him, stick in there, because it's it'll get you resilience and determination to get in there, and he's got his chance now.
And are you, when he's now involved in that, have you learned all your lessons and happy to stand on the side, or does a little bit of the tiger parent come back in again?
Oh no! I'd be definitely the guy in the background. In fact, if anything, quietly, I'd obviously speak to him about his game or whatever else. But I'd more spend my time with the coaches, or if they wanted, a chance to chat, that's where I would sort of divert my energy. Because I've learned, as you say, I've learned a lot by coming both as a teacher, academy manager, running the academy pathway in England, and now obviously comparing and contrasting, the English system to the Irish system. I find that's more beneficial to pass on my experience to the coaches.
I read that when you were doing your coaching badges that you wrote a 10,000-word thesis called An Analysis into the Effectiveness of Changing My Coaching Behaviour to Create Mentally Stronger Individuals and a More Cohesive Team. What were the principles that you came up with out of that? Distill the 10,000 words into a nice little bite-sized chunk.
Very good research, Nathan. I'm impressed. I guess the key thing, what I was trying to do was I had a really talented group of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And I was looking at the ways in which I could get the most out of them and try and change their behaviours as players by changing my behaviours as coach. So rather than being directive all the time, by being more empowering sometimes by being more questioning, but also sometimes, making sessions tough or putting rocks in the way, as we said, on the rocky road, to try and create players who are going to be prepared to deal with the pressure of going into senior rugby, which was obviously for Leeds at the time. And also I wanted to really create challenging training sessions, which meant that they became tighter as a group and became more cohesive. And, this was back in 2003, I think I did it. And I would stand to it now. In fact, I would say a lot of the principles that I applied then to that under-19 group would be exactly the same principles that I apply here at Leinster. But it was a really good project to do because it gave me the theory behind the practice as well.
One thing that you clearly are very passionate about is leadership, and you've done a leadership podcast with us here on Off the Ball that was really fascinating to listen to, and we've spoken a lot about what you've done at Leinster as well with some of the players involved, particularly with somebody like Gary Ringrose, who I think a lot of work has gone into developing his leadership qualities. And can you talk about the processes that go into that, and not necessarily focusing just on Gary Ringrose, but is that something that can be transferred to youth sport and underage sport, that process of, even at a young age, because you go into an under-8 training session, the alpha male stands out already, and that can continue all the way up from under-8 to under-16 to under-18, as to how you get young people to take more responsibility and more of a leadership role?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, well, first of all, it's to get young people to learn that leadership is to understand that leadership is a skill that can be learned. So I think, we, as you say, we get this sort of perception when we're coming through the school that the same person's been captain in every age grade, and this person takes all the responsibility and everyone else, just lets the person take the responsibility. But, what would be really effective in age grade teams is we shared the leadership roles and responsibilities. So we grew other leaders, and we try and educate the players that, leadership is a skill that can be learned. And it starts with self-awareness, understanding your own personality and what makes you tick and what gets the best out of you and maybe what motivates you. And also, what are the qualities that you need to bring the best out in other people? So that sort of self-awareness, social awareness, relationship management piece. I actually think in schools, they should have, as part of the curriculum, you wouldn't necessarily assess it or give an exam on it, but some element of leadership development or emotionally intelligent development, or communication skills, or how to become more confident when speaking in meetings. There's a great quote that confidence comes from competence. So often people wait a long time to become confident, but what we should be doing is trying to increase our competence, which means obviously in the end we become more confident. So with the Leinster players, I guess my sort of leadership evolution, I ended up a bit of a rocky road at school, but I got there in the end, I guess. I ended up in leadership positions. Then I went to university, and I was back at the bottom of the sort of pile again as a first year in a big sporting university. And then I gravitated up to a third year and more leadership responsibility again. Then I went into a teaching environment, and I was back at the bottom again. And then I sort of worked my way up to, a more responsibility. I was getting to my late 20s and 30s. But my point is, and I was playing obviously rugby, which was amateur at the time, and then went professional, and again gravitated to more leadership responsibilities. But I was never taught how to become better as a leader. It just happened by almost experience. And then I went on a leadership course as part of my level 5 coaching qualification with England. And it was at Ashridge Business School. It was less about the technical and tactical, more about the fundamentals of leadership. And it basically opened the door to my understanding of the theory of leadership. And then what I try and do now with the Leinster lads is if I'm, just turned over 50 now and had all that experience from that moment onwards and another 20 years to add to it, I try and pass on what I've learned to your Gary Ringroses, your James Ryans, your Robbie Henshaws, Luke McGrath, and all the young leaders in the Leinster team who'll be the future leaders. What I learned at 32, why can't they learn that at 22? And that's, I guess, that's what I try and do. I give them a lot of stuff and hope that some of it sticks. Maybe it won't all stick for all the players, but we're trying also to grow the voices of all the players in the group. So generally, my experience over here is that they be a little bit more quiet than groups I've coached in England. So trying to grow that voice and their point of view out of the group that's coming through the system here at Leinster.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think the young Irish players
I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm interested for the people who are listening to maybe reflect on it as well. Perhaps it's part of the school system. I don't know, whereby a lot of them would come maybe from some of the bigger rugby schools, and such is the strength of the schools in Leinster. The quality of the coaching and the quality of environments is phenomenal. I mean, you look at some of the best schools in England, like your Millfields or your Sedberghs or whatever, the big rugby schools. But over here, it's because of the Schools Cup and because of this drive towards to win this competition, that really does generate a really high level of coaching and performance and intensity around that particular trophy, which I didn't realise till I came here. But alongside that, we need to make sure that we balance the desire to win that trophy with the need to grow individuals and not to make it so directive. I'm not saying it is, because I've not been in the environments, but I just get the sense that they come out of that environment which is so intense, and then suddenly they're in an academy with completely different group of players, and it's not quite as comfortable because it's not prescribed there. It's more open-ended. So perhaps that's the reason. I don't know. I guess let's say whether people like some of the lads I coach are more introverted than extroverted is just the fact that they've come from that sort of environment and that's their family background. I don't know.
You're obviously very well aware then with the school setup in Ireland and the Leinster Schools Cup and how important it is, and the fact that even though it's a schools competition, there's 8 or 16 page spreads in newspapers when it's on, that it's such a big deal. Around the inclusivity side of it then, have you taken much time to look at that around Ireland and how it is still focused on quite a few schools, that we're in a scenario still where quite often if Leinster are playing, you might have 12, 13 of the starting 15 come from the private school system, and what other talent is out there around the country that actually, if rugby can get into those heartlands, which they're doing bit by bit, the sort of talent that could come through if the investment goes into those other areas? Yeah,
I know for a fact that Leinster definitely are doing that, and I'm sure Munster, Connacht and Ulster are the same, because it's a small population in Ireland to draw from, and obviously when you've got competing sports such as soccer, obviously the GA sports, there's only so much time to go around. But there's no doubt that the value that players such as Kieran Frawley or Tyg Furlong, or when I first arrived here, Sean O'Brien, the guys who come down a different route, they had diversity and different perspectives and different skills and mindsets, if they haven't come through the particular system. So I'm all for, let's broaden it out to get as many people interested in sport as possible. But if it means that someone wants to be excellent in Gaelic football or hurling or whatever, then great. I've got no bias, particularly towards rugby. My bias is towards sport, and to make sure that people get the benefits of sport, and if you can get it when you are fit enough to play in those sort of elite teams, that'll stay with you. Those life skills that you'll get will stay with you for forever, and they'll transfer into your work and your life as well. And hopefully then that becomes a drip feed into the wider society as well.
You mentioned Gaelic games. I think a few GAA coaches have been in with you. I saw some photographs of the Mayo manager James Horan in at one stage watching Leinster training. There does seem to be a very open attitude at that elite level of coaching now, that actually people are more than happy to welcome other coaches in and to share the secrets, as they may well have been seen once upon a time.
Yeah, I mean, I that's always been my philosophy, really. So I've never been, I've had the benefit of being invited into, or got the opportunity to go into many environments. And, if ever we get the opportunity, or if ever I get the opportunity to share something I've learned, I will 100% take it, as my way of doing my piece, if you like. I think I remember I was asked to speak at the Gaelic Games conference, a coaching conference. There must have been about 800 people there at Croke Park, and You know, my experiences of what it feels like to coach on a Tuesday, Thursday, play on a Saturday, you know, that was my life, really. That's how I was brought up and how I coached. You know, I wasn't always been in this full-time environment. So I think the lessons that I've learned in those environments, it's rewarding to pass them on. And then also what you get back in return, and what I've learned since I've been in Ireland for the last, 4 or 5 years, is how elite, those sports are as well, and how much we can learn from them. Whether it's, we've also got Dublin and, Jim Gavitt I've met a few times, and there'll be lots of others actually. I mean, I won't name them all because I know it's quite a competitive world out there in Gaelic sports, but...
They'll all be ringing you up after this.
No, there's been a lot I've spoken to privately and had really, really good, interesting conversations. And the level of coaching and expertise, and I'm not just saying it because I live in Ireland, whether it's the school system, the academy system here at Leinster, the investments going into the clubs, or within the Gaelic sports. I've had less contact in soccer, obviously, but I think there's a very high level of coaching that goes on. And, as a consequence, hopefully getting the most out of the talent pool that's in the country.
You're obviously operating at a very high level at rugby at the moment, and I'm sure you hope that stays that way over the coming years. But by the sounds of the way you talk and how passionate you are just in general about sport and leadership, do you see a position in years to come, maybe a decade down the line, where it's not just rugby, where there's a greater job out there around Sport Ireland, Sport England, where actually you can have an influence on all forms of sport? I definitely really enjoy sharing what I've learned. So like in England, you've got Sports Coach UK, you've got UK Sport. I would regularly present at conferences there, and they're mainly the Olympic sports, I guess. I've presented to the Football Association. I'm on the technical advisory board for the Football Association. I presented to the England Cricket Coaching Conference. I presented to head teachers, to heads of rugby, heads of PE. So I probably do a lot of that anyway. I think, I guess my personal goal would be to coach, to keep coaching as long as I can, because if I can keep coaching, then I'm continually having to challenge myself to get better and to grow as a coach, to study coaching and study leadership. And then as you do the theory side of the study, if you like, and you're doing the practical side, so every week you've got a game, and some games go well and some games don't, and some sessions you do go well and some sessions they don't. Then you're building your own experience, which I think makes it more transferable to pass on to other coaches. And, if let's say my coaching career goes till, I don't know, whenever, mid-60s, 70, whoever, what I'd love to do ultimately is to be involved in coach development for sure, leadership development, because I'm starting now to get phone calls from players I used to coach who become coaches. And that sort of mentoring process is very rewarding, I find. And I'm saying it because there's 3 guys who mentored me who are now in their mid-70s who, in fact, my old lecturer who taught me PE, he's just turned 80, and I had a conversation with him the other day, and he taught me so much. So, if I think so highly of those people who are in their mid-70s now, that's the role I would like to play, in the future as well. Stuart, it's been brilliant to talk to you. You've been great with your time. We didn't even talk Leinster. We might talk rugby at some stage over the coming weeks when we get into the Six Nations, and you can look at what's happening with the various countries and the various tactics. We'd love to talk to you in a few weeks about all that, but you've been brilliant to come on as part of our series on the future of Irish sport, and it's always great to get your insight. Thanks a lot for joining us.
No problem. Thanks.
Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.